Let's go to Niger next, as European nations have begun evacuating hundreds of citizens from the country. The first of 3 French planes has arrived back in Paris with more than 250 people on board. Italy has also flown out dozens of its own nationals, as well as other European and American citizens. Meanwhile, defense officials from West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, will meet later to discuss the military coup that took place in Niger last week. Some countries in the region have come to the new leadership's defense, including Burkina Faso, Mali and Guinea, declaring that any military intervention in the country would be considered a declaration of war. Niger is located in the Sahel region, which is a key region for Western countries in counterterrorism operations. Let's speak to our correspondent, Catherine Berhanga, who is following the story from Nairobi for us. Catherine, let's start with events in Niger and what the neighbours are doing. ECOWAS had given the coup leaders a deadline of a week to restore democratic rule to the country. But what are the options really for where this goes next?
Yes, Nancy, this is really a huge dilemma, not only for Niger's neighbours, so the ECOWAS grouping of nations there in East Africa, but also for international allies. This is because, as you say, Niger is a crucial country when it comes to fighting Islamist groups connected to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, when West African heads of states met in Abuja in Nigeria at the weekend, they ordered the junta in Niger to hand over power back to the former president within a week, or else they threatened force against the countries. And following on from that statement, they said defense chiefs from the region would then meet this week in Nigeria to discuss these options. And that's the meeting that we're seeing in Nigeria starting today. But if you speak to analysts, if you speak to people who follow developments in the region, people do not believe that ECOWAS will go ahead and attack Niger to try and remove the military government. And then that leaves very few options on the table. We've seen Western governments removing aid. The United States has threatened the same. They're talking about removing military assistance to Niger. So those are some of the options. But as we've seen in Burkina Faso, in neighboring Mali, even with those threats, the military juntas continue to stay in power and continue their dominance in the countries.
And it's that threat from jihadists that's really exacerbating this issue, isn't it? Because countries like Mali and Burkina Faso are in solidarity with the coup leaders, having had coups there themselves.
Yes, when these militaries have taken over power from civilian governments, they've often said the reason that they're doing this is because of the fight against Islamist groups not going in the right direction. They talk about the lack of equipment. They talk about the fact that there isn't enough political support for the fight against jihadists, and that's why they've taken power. It's the same thing that we're seeing in Niger right now. But what has happened, obviously, is that then you do have continued instability in some of these countries. So in Burkina Faso, in Mali, even though the military has taken over, you do still see attacks from the Islamist groups. In the case of Mali in particular, they've kicked out foreign forces, the French, European countries, and they've turned to the Russian group, the Wagner paramilitary group. And they have about 1,000 troops in Mali at the moment, helping the military there to fight Islamist groups. Now, this is obviously another concern for international allies, especially Western countries. They're worried that in the case of Niger, even though there is no evidence that Russia helped stage this coup in Niger, there is a concern that obviously the instability then allows the Wagner group, other Russian forces to then entrench themselves in Niger, another country in West Africa where they would be losing influence.